first panel discussion of the day. And it is going to revolve around India taking global leadership in LEVs, opportunities and challenges. The discussion will focus on light electric mobility solution, India's unique mobility needs, and how India can become a global leader in this field. The discussion will also look at the transformative potential of swapping and leasing for EVs, and the critical aspect of charging networks and cell technology for light EVs. Now, on that note, I will take this opportunity to call on stage first our moderator who's going to moderate this panel discussion. Please put your hands together for Mr. Vikram Gaurineni, the Executive Director, Amar Raja Batteries Limited. I will quickly call all the panelists first. We're going to have a small ritual before we begin the panel discussion. That's going to be, we're going to capture the moment first and then move on to the panel discussion. So on that note, I would quickly like to invite our panelists on stage. I would request Mr. Swapnil Jain. Yes, of course, you can give a huge round of applause while they come. Ravin Mirchandani. I hope I got the name right. Mr. Pratik Gupta. And Dr. Rahul Valavalkar. I was told that the name has to be said right, so we welcome all our panelists, and let us just capture this moment first. Can we have the photographer here? While the photographer is taking the pictures and as they take their seats, I would like to borrow a few more moments to say a few words about our panelists. Mr. Swapnil Jain is the co-founder of Ather Energy and an engineering design graduate from IIT Madras. Mr. Jain, along with Tarun Mehta, conceptualized Ather Energy. Ather has built an entire EV ecosystem in India with a scooter as well as public charging infrastructure. Mr. Jain is an ardent believer in the power of technology and believes in the best innovation happens when multiple technologies work together. So welcome. And now, Mr. Mirchandani. He is the chairperson of Adore Powertech Limited and has spent his life on the road of many continents, and his passions have ended up him being about the road as well. He believes his job provides him the opportunity to work on both his passions through a focus on lithium and hydrogen mobility for vehicles and technology to change and influence driver behavior on road. So we welcome you, sir. Moving on to Mr. Pratik Gupta. He is the CEO of Gensol Electric Vehicles and has over 19 years of experience building technology-led businesses and product innovation across various industries. In the last 7 years, Mr. Gupta has led the design and development of Gensol EV's personal mobility platform. So welcome to you, sir. Last but of course not the least, Dr. Rahul. Customized Energy Solution. He is the president and MD of SO, which under his leadership has emerged as a thought leader in the areas of energy storage, renewables, demand response, electric vehicles, and a smart grid technology. He founded the India Energy Storage Alliance in 2012. So welcome to all the panelists, and over to the moderator. Vikram, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I know this is the post-lunch session, so we'll try to be as lively and upbeat as possible. I think I'm definitely aided in that effort with quite a stacked panel who I'm very grateful was all agreeing to be here today. We heard the keynote speaker earlier today. I think while we agree with the numbers or not, I'm very happy that it sparked a lot of discussion. In fact, people I've spoken to throughout the day to see what their feelings are on that number, they fall on both sides of the aisle. And I think either way we look at it, whether if you look at the Indian two-wheeler story, Indian three-wheeler story to begin with, I think the penetration of EV is here to stay. It's not really going anywhere, and it's only about, we need to discuss now how fast it's growing, not if it's growing. So I think that's quite clear. And another thing I wanted to kind of tackle with this panel today is when we look at where India stands in terms of EVs. The number of EVs growing in India, of course, it's not cars, so maybe the battery packs are smaller, the ranges traveled are a little bit less. But the fact is, we're actually going to be reaching a point where maybe keeping aside China, India may have more EVs on the road than any other country. And I think we're doing it faster, we're doing it in our own way. And I want to expand the discussion on light electric mobility, looking at light and local electric mobility, not only 2 and 3-wheeler, but even looking at some of the successes we've seen in the battery packs and the 4-wheelers being limited to 20, 25 kilowatt hour. So these are just a couple things to get started with. I'd like to go in order of the panelists. Maybe they can give a little bit of their initial insights into this topic that we're tackling. And maybe you can also talk about where you feel, what is the unique challenges, unique opportunities faced in Indian mobility. So we'll start off with Swapnil.
Right. Thanks, Vikram. Yeah, I think obviously in the last 1.5 years, we have seen a huge change in just the perception of electric vehicles itself, from being slow and boring sort of vehicles to really like all the quickest scooters in the market today are like electric scooters. So the fast, futuristic, and like technology packed sort of vehicles. And that's why I was telling to Vikram during the lunch that I don't think the transition is going to happen just because of TCO. The transition to electric mobility is just because of superior products which are going to come out of as part of electric powertrain. There's so much you can do with electric powertrain which you cannot do with a IC engine vehicle. And just that one change makes the products so much better, so much friendly to use that people are going to forget about range anxiety and or total cost of ownership. They're going to just love the product so much that they just want a superior product, right? Like again, generally we are also seeing a trend for people to stop to moving towards more and more premium products. We are seeing that in every segment, may it be appliances, may it be smartphones, apparels, whatever you see movement from people from being completely cost conscious to actually starting to value premium products and something which gives you a better experience. So and I think electric vehicles have as a promise to deliver very high quality user experience, and I believe that just on the back of that, the transition towards electric vehicles will happen. We have our unique set of challenges that unlike China, where most of the electric vehicles were, or at least electric two-wheelers were still continues to be a lot slow and underperforming. That's not going to be true for India. We are going to be needing very high performance premium electric vehicles, and that means that you have to develop new tech altogether. You have to develop a tech which will help with that sort of power levels, which will help with that sort of a thermal performance, which will help with that sort of a reliability, and that's going to be a very different ball game than what the vehicles in China have been about. So I think just the scenario is very, very optimistic, and especially for light electric vehicles, because the absolute delta which you have to pay to purchase an electric two-wheeler versus a electric four-wheeler is very small, and for the small delta you get a very, very powerful experience, and two-wheeler usually people use it for shorter commute for the most part. So I think we'll see a very fast transition towards electric vehicles on the back of better product experience itself.
Thanks, Swapnil. Ravin, would like to hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Vikram. First up, thank you so much for having us here. This is an eminent panel, and it's a privilege to be amongst you on this stage. What you showed us today and your plans for the future are simply breathtaking. Amara Raja has always been the industry leader that has taught the rest of us to dream big and to work hard to achieve that dream. And I think we will all be leaving remembering that Amara Raja dream and challenging ourselves to keep up to your aspirations as well. In terms of the question that you posed to the panel, where are we headed and what is India's journey? You're absolutely right. India is going to do it in its own way. A lot of people have said that in the morning as well today. 150,000 electric cars will be sold on Indian roads this year. And if you look at that number, that's actually higher than the number that was sold in Norway last year. 95% of vehicles sold in Norway in 2022 were electric, and India will have more sold per year. Now, that's a function of population, of course, but the reality is, like Vikram said, I think we will be the second largest EV adopting country in a very short span of time. How is India different? In some ways, we are very different. In some ways, we're not. I think India's learned to dream big, just like Amar Raja. We were stunned 3 years ago when we got our first Indian EV, which was the Tata Nexon. We got the Hyundai Kona and the Tata Nexon the same week. And I have to say, Sunil, our MD, and me had secretly seen the Tata Nexon in the Warwick Manufacturing Group under testing, just opposite the WMG lab, and we saw it in 2017, so we knew it was coming. But when we sat inside the car and drove it in India, it was breathtaking for how much more fun it was than the Hyundai Kona. And of course, the JLR design language had translated into the car. So India, I reckon as a result, what I'm trying to say is will be recognized as a small car global center of competence. And it'll be quite normal in countries that are used to small cars to be driving a small electric four-wheeler that has been made in India. It's good to see that we have finally landed on, in terms of cars and buses and trucks, CCS2 as the design protocol or the charging protocol. It's somewhat surprising to see America vacillate. They went from the CCS1 standard to the Tesla standard recently. I'm glad to see that India, without government intervention, is settling onto what's best for the industry. And that also shows the maturity of the auto industry in India and the fact that we can work it out despite all sorts of confusion within policymakers. Finally, the only comment I'd like to leave everybody with is on the Energizing India podcast, we make DC fast chargers, and there's one in the foyer here that ChargeZone uses. You'll see it when you leave. As part of that effort, we also have a podcast called Energizing India, and Vikram has been on it. And we talk to lots of people who make decisions, protagonists who influence where the industry is going in India. And the one common theme that comes out is people who are buying an ICE vehicle in 2023, 2024. This is the last cycle where they will buy an ICE vehicle. When these cars come for replacement, the natural choice will be EV. And as you said, it's not necessarily going to be about TCO. It's going to be about the fact that there is availability, there is less range anxiety because the charging network will be there, and because the driving experience and the reliability is just a lot better. Thanks.
Thanks, Javin. I think a lot of good facts, and probably one thing I definitely have to mention. You mentioned the Tata Nano. I think I'm personally thrilled that it's going to see a second life in the electric version. I think we can all agree that the Tata Nano is probably the most ambitious automotive project globally in history. And if they can do it right in the EV sector, it's a really good feeling for all Indians. Prateek, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm actually trying to represent two companies. I'll first start with BlueSmart, which is what Vijay got me here for. And just Vijay keeps talking about the impact rather than the size, and just putting some numbers out there, and I'll be reading because I don't want to get them wrong, because the team has worked extremely hard in the last 4 years to achieve these. So BlueSmart is a ride-hailing company which is using EV-only cars, and they are right now at a fleet size of about 5,000 vehicles plying in Delhi and Bangalore. They have done 300 million plus zero emissions kilometers. They have done 8 million rides. Every day they're doing 25,000 rides. That is 30 million units of electricity dispensed and 18,000 tons of carbon emissions saved. So that is the impact factor that, a small fleet in the big ocean, right? A 5,000 fleet is not big by the Indian standards, can make a huge difference. And then bringing that to the Indian ecosystem, the Indian use cases, is where Gensol EV was born. The Gensol EV is in this light electric vehicle platform, bringing a two-door, two-seater car. And when people ask us that, why do you think you'd be launching a two-door, two-seater car in a ride-hailing business, getting onto BlueSmart and other, the simple facts of the industry is 80% of rides done by across the industry are single occupants. And a lot of occupants actually in India sit in the front seat because air conditioning doesn't reach in the back seats in the weathers that we have. So it just makes sense to make a vehicle that is designed for India. Of course, in doing so, when you make a compact car, light electric car, you gain a lot of advantages. You gain, with a small battery pack, you can go 200 plus kilometers. You can have large storage. You can do 40 paise per kilometer. You can bring down the price points down by 40%. And that, in some estimates, show that will quadruple the market space for ride hailing. So we saw the ride hailing market take off pre-COVID, and now it's become, at par with what the numbers were pre-COVID. But the next wave of, increase in that market size will happen with these India-centric kind of a platforms that are coming in. You can fast charge using a slow charger. That's another thing that we keep talking to people about, that using AC chargers, you can charge our cars in 2 hours. These are some of the remarkable things that, you can do when you're a light electric vehicle platform. So we're really excited to bring this to the market along with the Blue Smart team, and and seeing these manufacturing plants being put here in India really makes supply chain much easier, makes things much better from an India strategic point of view. So really excited about the opportunities that we face, but we still have a long way to go. We still have an ecosystem that is still developing in terms of manufacturing in EV, and a lot of other components that have to kind of come together to bring out a car that Indians can be proud of, in all sorts of segments. And then also looking at export, right? As in, traditionally, we haven't looked exports to Europe as something that comes naturally to us. And this is again where we are trying to do our part, in the sense we're looking at exporting to Europe and these kind of markets with our light electric platforms, because the use cases are quite common there. So really excited to what's coming in the next few years for the India, OEM segments.
Thanks, Prateek. And I think you brought up the point about ecosystem build out, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot from the second session, which is built on that. Rahul, I think we're meeting very often, and I think these events are usually, we're sitting on the opposite end, and you're asking the questions, but would like to hear your thoughts today on Indian LEV leadership.
Sure. I think the good part about being last on the panel is I can just agree to all the three speakers who said, but again, not on a lighter note, but I think really I believe that it is there. And in fact, I was looking at the numbers which were presented in the earlier session, and I'm convinced that the reality is going to be actually much faster. If you just go back maybe 10 years back and think about the debate what was happening in India around smartphones, and you had CEOs of Vodafone and Nokia talking about how India just doesn't need it, 3G is sufficient, India will never adopt smartphones. And now if you see again, as the products are ready, as again Prateek mentioned, that they are specifically designing products, looking at the requirement of the Indian customers and tailor-making those products. Overall, I agree with Swapnil that just the technology is superior. So again, there is no reason to try to fight out as though IC versus this and all the debate about is there enough lithium in the world or other thing. I think ultimately, if we have found out oil to run for last 100 plus years and power the IC engine, I think since 1970s we have been talking about running out of oil. I think conversation we are seeing with lithium, we are a long way away from running out of lithium. And unlike fossil fuel industry where you are actually burning the fuel and you have to keep on digging up new, here with electric mobility, you have the ability to completely recycle and have the circularity. So although right now, while we are next maybe 10 to 20 years, we are growing exponentially. So recycling is going to play a very small part of the new vehicle ecosystem. But still, I think recycling overall will keep on playing more role and make the entire e-mobility transition a reality. And right now, I think, again, just if you see the number of forwards and in the press, the discussion happening around is the EV charging with coal power plant, is it worse off and other thing. I think that just actually shows that now the conventional industry is a little bit now scared and they see writing on the wall. And what I think is happening effort is to try to just delay the transition as much as possible so that the pace goes a little bit slower. But overall, I do feel that more than, I think, customer side and customer being ready, I think we are now entering a phase where we are going to be supply constrained. And that's where it is really exciting to see the kind of commitment what Amar Raja Group is putting up for the manufacturing, as well as everyone who is here on the panel, the investments what each of you are doing. Because I truly believe that we are now, I think, almost entering a phase where if we have the enough supply, then it's a question about communicating and targeting the right audience. We don't need to go to everyone in the audience, and we don't need everyone to purchase an electric vehicle. We are still talking about low single-digit numbers. And there is more than just waiting for a superior product or a cheaper product. What we need is solutions on financing, the business models, and other aspects. And I think we are seeing that part coming together. And with that, I'm actually convinced that the numbers what you saw for 2040, with only 40-45% EV penetration, I think those are going to be way underestimates as per everything what we are looking at, because it is not only about technology or consumer behavior, but it is a ecosystem effect which is going to happen with the business model, financing, and other aspects coming together, and that's where the transition is going to be much faster. That's our hope.
So we had a couple of points I think are really around the fact, in a takeaway what Rahul said, that it's possible that the EV supply is actually lower than the EV demand. As an Indian market, already the demand for EVs is quite high, and it's actually up to many of us in the ecosystem to gear up that supply. I wanted to actually bring it back to Swapnil. What I wanted to understand from you is, as we move beyond a TCO, what are those last hurdles that you still see when you face the Indian customer? What is the last things we need to kind of address before they really go pure EV going forward?
I think in the last couple of years, a lot of the hesitance people had about just the quality of the products, and can it be fast or can it not be, and again, even things like range anxiety. I think a lot of people are beyond that, right? It was really an anxiety, and now people have realized that it's even a 60-kilometer range vehicle is actually good enough for them for a daily usage, and most people should be actually quite happy with that. I think the last mile which is left on this front is purely on the safety front. I think there is definitely some worry about the safety of electric vehicles, and I think it is going to take some time for people to be completely okay, or at least have that faith that okay, or maybe one or two incidents might be there, but for more often than not, it is always a better product than ICE. At the same time, I think the next big thing which is left to solve is charging infrastructure, especially home charging. I think with more and more people in the apartment complexes buying, I think that's the next big thing. And I think even OEMs will have to work towards figuring out charging infrastructure solutions for people, making it comfortable for them to buy, to install a charging station at home, or actually how do you work towards like sort of completely making the entire parking lot charging friendly, EV friendly of sorts. So there's some solutions in the market. We are also working actually we have already launched our own solution, which basically any apartment complex can just install like hundreds of those, and you can just, anyone can use any electric vehicle and just charge and pay. So I think these are the last two big things which are left. I think price also, I think most people are fairly comfortable with the price, which everyone earlier thought that it's too expensive and people will not buy it. I think most people are fairly okay with the pricing. Obviously, there is obviously work which will happen over the next few years. A lot more R&D will happen, and prices will keep coming down. But even today, the prices are fairly okay, and as long as people are convinced about the safety of the product and have access to charging infrastructure, I think that's the only last two things to be really solved.
Just before I let you go, actually, I forgot to ask the second part of my question. Of course, you did say that maybe cost is not quite the concern it was earlier, but do you see alternate models like swapping, battery as a service? How do they fit into maybe your plans? And do you think, how does this ecosystem, is it one versus the other?
Definitely not. I think there is a place for both sort of design. It entirely depends on how many kilometers one travels per day, and in some cases also, do you really are you really not able to get a charging infrastructure, or are you getting a charging point at home? Definitely for fleet vehicles who travel a lot per day, I think definitely for them, I think swapping is the way to go forward. You cannot have any downtime. You can't wait for the vehicle to charge until maybe super fast charging technologies can actually change that, but probably swapping is a better alternate for them.
Just to jump in, when you talk about swapping, how would, let's say, an Ather vehicle, would it be a battery that you would standardize along with other OEMs, or?
So because we are very focused on personal vehicles, personal mobility, we may not ever venture into a battery swapping sort of a design. You have to do certain compromises when you have to do a battery swapping, when your architecture has to be designed for battery swapping, and that would, while it is beneficial for more running more kilometers, it ends up compromising in some sense on the overall experience of the product. So from the trade-off perspective, we will always be with a fixed battery sort of an architecture, maybe not go into a swapping sort of an architecture.
Thank you. Maybe Ravin, on the same one, I know that Adore being one of the OGs, let's say, in power electronics of India, and you're wearing your Quench shirt today, the Rolls-Royce of charger, as you've called it. Where do you kind of see these, charging vis-a-vis swapping, and is it really that much of a challenge to build out a charging network, like some people are suggesting?
Thanks, both very good questions. And for a long time, there was a religious divide of charge versus swap. And, you'd be on a panel like this, and there'd be very violent arguments about it. But I tend to agree with you. It's actually use case based. And if your use case is to create a user experience, then you will walk away from swap, because your differentiation kind of gets compromised because your architecture has to be very similar if you're going to do swap. So it works really well for last mile, for delivery, for Amazon, and things like that. I've seen it work well for buses in China, and I've also seen a truck company in Australia that's retrofitted old Mack ICE trucks and created a battery swap mechanism. I can't say I believe this will be the way the industry goes. I think the industry will go down hydrogen and sodium for long distance and for miles, rather than a swap infrastructure. But in India, in Vietnam, in China, Taiwan, in places where there's a lot of 2- and 3-wheelers, and you have a last mile infrastructure that needs to be put in place, it could be quite interesting. I disagree about price not being an issue, and I'm really happy to hear that Ather's experience is that people are now agnostic to price and more giving more priority to experience. We don't see that in the infrastructure end, where it's really a digital zero-sum game. L1 wins, and that's it. Now, why is it difficult to put out a charging infrastructure? I think some of you might have seen the bad publicity the poor BPCL got with 10,000 chargers being put out, and somebody did a survey and 90% were not working. It's not just them. Around the world, this is the case with fast chargers, because if you're putting in the cheapest network, in the end, you're buying Godrej steel cupboards that are not going to be working, right? And they're very expensive steel cupboards on the side of the road. A fast charger, by necessity, needs love, needs service, needs someone to be available to be able to bring it back in service within the SLA, which in most parts of the world is 4 hours, right? In India, the problem we have is that every system is geared to L1, whether it's the PSU system or the private industry system with the large Indian companies, it's geared towards L1, which means China will win. Because China makes in a week what an Indian factory makes in a year. Perhaps not when compared to Amara Raja, but for the rest of the industry, that's really the case. And that means they have the economies of scale, which means they will always win if you do not have something that is technically verified and just price verified. It will be a challenge for us in India. We're going to have to go through the learning curve. It is the responsibility of the OEMs and the automotive industry to create and help facilitate and foster an industry in India that can keep the network alive, because you're clearly not going to get that kind of support, intellectual property and services from overseas. In terms of just the point that was made about houses all having chargers and whether the grid can be able to take it, we've seen different models. We participate in many economies, so we've seen something different in Australia to America, for example. So in Australia, where it's called strata titles, a building with 100 apartments. What we are doing right now is working with companies that are putting in 100 AC chargers for these, but we write the whole dynamic balancing software that manages the load from every apartment identifying who's using an air conditioner or a boiler, and then managing the total load available to the building, and then dynamically going up and down on how much power each car park gets, right, to make sure that the building is not collapsing the grid. In America, they have very severe demand charge penalties. So most fast charging stations on a highway typically are put in with a battery wall, because the peak shave actually comes from the energy wall rather than the grid, and so you reduce the demand penalties that come off the grid. So I think India will evolve with its own mechanism eventually. I think we will need battery walls, we will need dynamic load balancing software and hardware to manage how much a building demands, and we will create our own jugaad eventually in finding a way where everyone has access to a charge point and it's not collapsing the grid and yet it's reliable.
Just a question for you. When it comes to, I think I absolutely agree with you that as long as we stick with this L1 mentality, we're really you're never incentivized to bring quality to the forefront. But, just wanted to understand, when you talk about the business models around charging, I would just think to myself that if any time I could charge at home, where it's very cheap, versus somebody has to put a margin on charging in public, what have you been seeing? How is that actually working out?
So it depends on the country, and it depends on how the vehicle is used. You're absolutely right. 90% of charging typically is done at home or in the office with an AC slow charge, because you don't need anything else, and it's good for your battery as well. When you're traveling down on a highway, which is your 10% use case, going to Goa or going to Mahabalipuram, that's when you really need to use the fast charger, because you need to pull in to give you a top up of your state of charge, and that's the case in India as well. Most people are using AC charge, and the DC charge really is about distance, and therefore it's in hotels where you might be staying overnight and you need a quick boost. Now, when I say it's different in different countries, let's look at Norway, for example, where we participate in that economy. Most people live in apartments, no access to curbside charging, no access to charging at home. The only place they can charge is in the office. They don't take the car to the office very often because they're going in public transport. But in Norway, everybody loves to go away on the weekend. They want to hike, fish, surf, ski. And so what happens is on the Fridays and the Sundays at the highway charging stations, there's cars backed up 20, 25 deep. They've stopped taking bookings in Norway for fast charging, and quite often there's people fighting because, who was in line first, and I was waiting longer, and it can get quite violent on a weekend and stressful. So in Norway, charge point operators are actually ripping out the AC chargers in shopping malls and changing the first 20 into DC 30 kilowatt fast chargers. The smallest fast charger available is being put into shopping mall car parks, so that when you pull in for a haircut, buying some wine, just getting some milk, you can get a 60 or 70 kilometer boost, which is adequate to take you to the weekend hike and back. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that it will evolve in different ways in different countries, but clearly AC will be the mainstay of your charging at home or charging in the office.
So Prateek, when you're building out your fleet, I know you shared with us that you have a taxi fleet. You're also looking at offerings for last mile delivery. This is being a fleet. How have you looked at charging versus swapping? What's the kind of business models that you feel can work out in the long run for you?
Yeah, it's challenging. As in, I think BlueSmart has over 1 million square foot of charging hubs, and it's painstaking building that, getting the transmission lines, getting all the permits and all of that, and on top of it, it's also a big capital outlay. So yeah, as in but there are some models that we've been looking at. We recently saw this Chinese brand called Maple, which is serving automated battery swapping for cars. And they're running 2,000 vehicles in Shanghai with these container-sized battery swapping systems, which change battery in 3 minutes, and with 20 batteries, they can do about 300 swaps a day. So those are some of the things, but again, the OEMs will have to kind of work with that to be compatible. And so you can do the battery swap for cars with a lot of combined effort from the industry, or you could look at solutions which are, of course, basically light electric vehicles is another big advantage is that they charge faster. So you can look at scaling up with a lot of these kind of solutions which require 2-hour charging on AC. But it is a complicated problem, and we'll have to find our own solutions, of course, to keep the BlueSmart fleet running. The hub expansion comes hand in hand with the vehicle numbers that are that are increasing. and it is a challenge that we are all facing, and it's up to the OEMs to kind of bring out newer solutions and bring more innovation to solve that problem.
And I would think it's doubly challenging for you because uptime is money, right? You can't really afford to have half your fleet charging at any given point of time.
Yeah. I think you can be smart about how you kind of, run that. And as cars with more kilometers come on board, like 200 plus kilometers is a good point that the Blue Smart team sees that they can actually find the off hours to charge their battery cars. And that model has been working in the city, model. So yeah, it's a combination of, getting more cars with higher kilometer ranges will definitely help. But yes, the infrastructure cost is still a big prohibitive to actually scale really fast because the market demand, even today, Blue Smart cars are not available on Insta rides because there aren't enough cars. But the industry requires more cars, and scaling up is currently bottlenecked with the charging infra.
So I want to bring Rahul in here. Rahul, you work closely with all the government bodies who are putting these policies. We've been seeing, at least hearing that there's going to be a swapping policy coming out, that there's a charging thing. I think government, at least, it seems to be pushing many things at once. I think a lot of things can coexist. But where do you think, at least from the policymakers' side, where do you think they see the logic of battery swapping, where standardization must come in, or whether it'll come in? Last thing I wanted to see if you could address some of Ravin's concerns. In an L1 economy, L1 tendering economy, how do we bring a robust charging network?
So both are challenging questions. I think in terms of the policymakers' view, I feel that the biggest challenge which policymakers happens is when they get too many inputs from different people, then it's very easy to get confused. I think when it comes to swapping, again, I really love the way Swapnil talked up with clarity on how Ather is looking at it, because they are looking at focusing on personal mobility and where swapping is not a priority. So they are focusing on fixed vehicle. Whereas the way I see it is sometimes with not necessarily just policymakers, but politicians in general who also influence policies, suddenly swapping is being presented as a silver bullet which is going to take e-mobility to everyone, that people will just buy vehicles without batteries and those vehicles will be cheaper than IC vehicles and they can just go and swap it anywhere. But practically, if you see, most of those users are going to be driving 10, 15, 20 kilometers per day. That means they will swap their batteries for once a week, and there is no swapping service provider who is going to be able to serve that model, right? You cannot pay for upfront for batteries, have 2x additional batteries sitting on standby, charge for supplying, and then have someone just keeping that battery on idle in some parking lot. So that just model and business case does not exist. Where we see swapping makes sense is particularly for the people who value time. So where the vehicle downtime, or you have to have then extra vehicles to serve the purpose, there I think swapping makes a lot of sense. And as a IESA, what we have been trying to work on is try to make sure that swapping gets a level playing field, because right now there are a lot of barriers where, be it from the GST point of view or some of the other things, where just swapping is getting additional penalties for having a swappable solution, which we think is unfair, and that is actually delaying some of the adoption. So what as a IESA through the India Electric Mobility Council we have been trying to work on is focus on those type of aspects and then go with a very clear pitch to the government on where they need to do. Again, the standardization or interoperability, these are the things which again get talked a lot, and I know there were a lot of efforts put together, but the general feedback what we have got from industry is that is not a priority. Right now there is still scope for innovation. Most of the industry players want that. And again, if you go back to the business model, then you will understand that actually really from the industry side also it's not a requirement. People talk about, cell phones, you can roam on any network with any handset and other thing. But the difference is, if I am going to be paying for a battery which is going to get swapped, then I don't want someone to take that battery, go and swap with someone else and give me some other battery, because the quality or the usage level of the battery, state of health is all going to be very dependent. So as long as I'm doing it within my network, I'll be fine. And there, as long as I have 3 or 4 options for vehicles and I can use that, that should be fine. Because the other challenge which we have been told from OEM side is the homologation. Every time you have to go through the homologation process with a different set of batteries, you have to spend huge amount of money. So there is no OEM who is going to be sitting and try to homologate their vehicle with 10 or 20 different batteries, right? So those are practical issues where I think from policymaker point, I think there is a now realization coming up that we don't need to over prescribe policy and let the industry evolve and come to that. Now the second question to the L1, it's again a harder question. I think we cannot get away from L1 in India context, but at the same time we can minimize the impact of it. If all of us can work together and make sure that the specifications which are going in for those tenders meet the minimum requirement. Because the biggest, I think, assumption is where L1 will not work is if L1 is going a substandard product. But that's the area where I think IESA or other alliances can work together is that if we can work with the tendering authorities to make sure that there are appropriate technical and performance standards embedded as part of the tender, then I think having a L1 is a fair game. But if that doesn't happen, then that's a challenge. And there also the challenge what we see it is most of the time people do agree on that in a combined forum, but then most of the companies or maybe at least some companies go and try to influence the wording to favor their own thing, and then ultimately you end up seeing a khichdi of specifications which actually ends up negating lot of efforts which IESA or other similar organizations are putting together. So if again we can address that and we can make sure that there is a minimum good performance standard which is embedded for those tenders, then I think it will improve the chances for quality solutions to get into it. The other aspect is somewhere incorporating the service side of it. Like for example, agency like ESL or CESL, we have to put enough pressure because ultimately they are spending taxpayers' money, right? It's not something they are spending some private money, that they should not be going with just numbers, and they have to have the service part of it, the uptime and other things, those needs to be part of the any tender. And that's a part again where we are working with Niti Aayog as well as other like-minded think tanks and policymakers to try to make sure that we'll try to learn from some of the mistakes which have happened and try to improve on that.
Thank you. So just slightly shifting gears, I think another hot topic, it's, we also talk about chemistry, the right choice for India, what's going to work out. I think maybe a lazier explanation is because LFP is more cycle life, heat resistant, that should be the solution. Again, wanted to bring it to Swapnil. Is it that, again, chemistry, is that this or that? Where are we going to see interplay? Where are we going to see overlap and coexistence?
I think, and again, this is from how we have also transitioned from purely believing in NMC and then figuring out that probably there is a space for both the chemistries together. NMC works really well when you have high performance, high energy density requirements. It obviously it's a lot more proven in many contexts. But again, LFP is a lot more robust chemistry. It has the cost-wise today. It obviously helps to have LFP. It turns out to be fairly cheaper, though the prices are very dynamic, and it might happen that at some point LFP might become expensive than NMC. We never really know. But there is definitely a space for both the chemistries. They have their strengths and weaknesses. Robustness being for LFP and high performance being for NMC. Cost being for LFP, and high power density being for NMC as well. So I think both of them will coexist for different requirements. More cost-conscious requirements will have LFP. More performance-oriented requirements will end up having NMC itself.
And Ravin, just wanted to kind of bring back to something you said. I think this is a very interesting statistic. You're saying that in 23, 24, we'll basically see, like in many families, a last ICE purchase. And I would say, kind of, what do you think, is that possible in India? Do we need to work on anything? Of course, you already mentioned some challenges around setting up charging, but I guess outside of public charge points, what are other kind of solutions and all that you think could be possible? And in fact, I didn't know that you're part of the hydrogen ecosystem until the other day. Wanted to just bring in, we usually see hydrogen being talked about in heavy vehicles, long range. Do you think there's any play here in even this light mobility?
That's a good question, and thank you for that, Vikram. Where do I start? I don't want to go on for hours because it's a subject I'm passionate about. But it's safe to say this. I think in 10 years, when you drive down to a fuel station, you won't be going to a bunk, you'll be going to a molecule-agnostic energy station. You'll be on the last of your petrol cars, so save that Toyota Fortuner if you still drive it. It's not coming out as an electric for a while. But you'll be able to get petrol, diesel, CNG, LNG, LPG, and also battery charge, battery swap, and likely a hydrogen recharge station, right? It'll be one station that does everything. And we will evolve into using a fuel based on our use case. So if you're driving 200 kilometers a day, max, or 200 kilometers a week, in most instances, you'll use a battery electric vehicle. If you're going long and slow, you'd have a choice of sodium ion versus hydrogen. So rickshaws might move to sodium ion because you really don't need that kind of torque when you're driving a rickshaw. The same for some kind of trucking distances, it might be sodium. Taxis, buses, planes, trains would likely want to move to hydrogen. So when you look at, for example, Paris, 40% of the taxi fleet is already hydrogen taxis. You look at London, 60% of the bus fleet is already hydrogen, the same in Hamburg. So you will see that it really depends on your use case. It's not going to be one size fits all. Today you buy a car for your 95% use case. You buy a car for your 60% use case, and then it happens that you also want to have a four-wheel drive to go to the beach once a year, and so you get the Toyota Fortuner. But you will buy for your 95% use case and then rent for the rest as the rental economy becomes available, and so you won't need to make choices as you are doing today. So I think we're changing, we're moving, and we've just got to be comfortable through that process. I see the ICE industry struggles with that because they're used to standardization, everything being the same, don't change anything for 10 years, use the same supplier for everything and keep the part the same. And today we're moving to a very fluid kind of dynamic, and that's the bit that the ICE industry will have to get used to because the energy industry, through the transition, has already moved towards that.
Thank you. So Prateek, we kind of brought in choices of technology for cells, charging. Is this something that you guys are actively looking at, or is it matter for you, or as long as it works, it's good enough for you?
Well, for us, it's a little easier because on a two-wheeler platform, size and weight both come at a huge penalty. When you're in a car format, you are a little bit eased out. So you see most car companies around the world using LFP as a chemistry of choice. Of course, we are all exploring, newer formats, newer chemistries. So we'll have to see, But I 100% agree with Ravin that we all have to be comfortable with this mixed modal kind of operating system. We've seen other industries do it, the phone industry, like he mentioned, the cloud technologies. There are so many different cloud technologies. You adopt what is most suited for your use case, and that's where mobility is also headed. So it will take relearning, unlearning of a lot of things, and when it comes to chemistry, again, in the morning session, we saw that there's so many upcoming technologies, all with different advantages, some are good in different use cases. So I think it will be like that, and as a OEM, you best you can do is kind of be modular in your design, that you can adopt a different chemistry at a different point. Till 2 years ago, we were NMC only. Now we are NMC and LFP, but we launch with LFP. But again, if there's an opportunity, we should be able to kind of adapt quickly. I think that's the new mantra that I think we all need to be ready for.
Sure. So Rahul, I hate to keep putting you in the hot seat on the policy topic, but I think you can handle it. I think one more thing that, an idea the industry will keep talking about is that, maybe from the policymaker side, they should be more prescriptive about outcomes and less on technology. Just wanted to understand from you, maybe the first time we went for a PLI in ACC was quite stringent. Almost the chemistry was being defined by the battery performance that was. Do you think going forward that's the effective way, or we should more talk about maybe carbon output should be this much, range should be delivered this much, whatever outcomes over technology solutions?
So here I'll go with, I think, recommendation what Vijayanand gives. I think whatever government does, it needs to be simplified. So I think the challenge was when the original PLI was getting drafted back in 2018-19, the advice what government had received was that there is a risk that there is a lot of outdated LFP technology from China which will get dumped into India, and India will just become a dumping ground for second-hand manufacturing facilities if there is no performance standards set up. From that point of view, the original design which was done almost actually completely eliminated LFP. So we actually, as IESA, we went back, we requested certain changes, and then ultimately with policymakers, I think most of the time it is a trade-off, right? So there are certain things, there are different priorities which they are trying to balance, and what we felt was with the framework which came in was something which we could live with. Yes, there were certain boundary cases where certain cells were not being eligible, but this was also done looking at 5 years forward. And there we believed that yes, the technology is evolving, and if you want to be at the leading edge as an industry in India, then we should be able to like push, or at least government, if they are not going to be incentivizing every manufacturer in India, if they are giving money, then let that money go towards people who are trying to sort of be on a leading edge rather than just a commodity thing. That was the thinking, and that's where I still stand by. There are, I think many of you may be part of WhatsApp group where I'm the only one who keeps on defending the ACC PLI, but I truly believe that ACC PLI actually has served its purpose. Having seen this entire process since 2016, I believe that without ACC PLI, basically we would be just importing everything and we would not have had any chance of having any manufacturing in India. Whereas now we have gone to a stage where we are looking at domestic manufacturing more than 3 times what PLI is going to be funding. But yeah, in general, I'd love that if there is some of those relaxations can happen. We have given some recommendations to government as ISA based on the feedback which is received from it. But the only caution which I give to people is that if you try to tweak the design too much, then you have a risk of going into a 2 or 3 year cycle for discussion and debate. And already we have seen too many changes. There are most of the key people who are involved in drafting and getting the PLI through the entire cabinet approval and other process no longer are there. So we don't have the kind of backing on the policy making side which was there in 2019, 2021 right now. So I'm always scared of trying to make perfect enemy of good. I think with the current ACC framework, if the most important thing is time. I think we as a country are losing so much time, and what hurts me most is we are just not bothered about the time. Originally, the vision what ISA said was we wanted to get 20 gigawatt hour manufacturing by 2020. Now, if you can just imagine, if we had not 20, even 10 gigawatt hour manufacturing in India in 2020 when COVID struck, how much money could have poured into India, how much we could have had. In 2017, 18, 19, we had almost all major global players were exploring partnerships in India. Just from India side, we were not ready. So we missed that boat. And by the time in 22 we were ready, the scale at which all the international partners were looking at had changed. And that's why in the ACC PLI, we could not attract that. So my thought process right now at least is that ultimately, again, as IESA, it's a collective decision. But my personal thing is that we need to start valuing time, and rather than waiting for a perfect policy and something that does not exist. Whatever policy we will do, I'm pretty sure in 2 years there will be 100 people who will criticize that. That's something where always it depends on not just what is written on the policy, how industry responds to it, how the implementation happens, and there are so many things to go wrong. But right now as a country, we need to be very laser focused on implementation, scaling up, because we are on verge of becoming obsolete, right? If we don't do it now, we are now talking about 100, 150 gigawatt hour manufacturing in 2030, when global manufacturing is going to be somewhere between 3 to 5,000 gigawatt hour. And we are in top 3 markets. So if we are in top 3 markets and we do not have even 2%, 3% market manufacturing capacity, we are not going to be relevant. So that's where some of these things, I think, let's not worry too much. Whatever we can get support from government, let's take it and move on.
So I think I have to apologize to the audience. We have 50 minutes. I really push it to the end. We don't really have time for a Q&A. But I would like to thank all of our panel speakers here today. I think one clear message is that electric is here to stay. We need to basically look at what pace it's going to take. And from OEM, charging, business model, policy shaping, I think we have some heavyweights who've given us a lot of great inputs here today. And I think, yes, it seems to be that today should be a call to arms for all of the different stakeholders gathered here today. The time is now. We have to get moving on this. We shouldn't miss the boat like we've missed so many boats in the past. I think we have the will. I think we have all of the different talents that can absolutely do this, but we need to do it now. So thank you, gentlemen. It's been a wonderful opportunity hosting you, and look forward to doing it more in the future.